Hello, everyone. We're going to have a conversation today with Tim Byler. Tim and Cindy are the USCAL Region 4 conveners, and they have a roundtable intensive getting ready to happen in Florida that we'll talk about. But also, I wanted to talk to Tim about all of the roundtables that he attended throughout this past year. And so we'll talk about USCAL roundtables, but we'll talk about ministry as well. Tim and Cindy lead a church in Hinesville, Georgia. They are a multi-generational family of ministers. Tim has been a successor with his father, Phil, that many of you know. But Tim also is at an age where he's thinking about succession and what that looks like, how to pastor your own kids and now grandkids, and what a multi-generational family of ministers look like. Many of you not only know his father, but his sister, Wendy. And so him and Cindy have been in ministry for years, both as a traveling ministry, as leaders of a local church. And so their wealth of information from all of those backgrounds and experiences can be very, very helpful for all of us. So I hope you enjoy this conversation that I had with Tim Byler. Tim and Cindy are in Hinesville, Georgia. And Tim, I've already created an introduction with a little bit of bio, so the people that didn't know you, they know you a little bit better now. But first and foremost, I know that there were some storms that ran through the southern part of the United States and still coming up north. Everybody fared well there in Hinesville?
Yeah, everybody for the most part fared well. The eye of Debbie came right across our town. And we ended up with a lot of rain and a lot of flooding, and some families were displaced a little bit. But for the most part, it was a whole lot less than what they told us to anticipate. So we were thankful for that.
Yes. Well, we are too. And I know a lot of people were praying. And really, I think that in these moments, I made a video about this a couple days ago, that this is when we really learn how to live local. Because when it boils down to crisis, it's our family, friends, neighbors, our local church, people in the local church.
Yeah.
A couple things that I think are important for us are the roundtables and the intensives. And those things are being advertised. I know you've had one intensive before, and I want you to explain exactly what happens in those intensives. You had one in Atlanta, one coming up in Florida. But first, back up, let's talk about roundtables in general. I'm really curious. You were able to go to several roundtables across the United States with us. And what was your opinion? Can you give us some feedback, especially to the people watching, perhaps who didn't have a chance to go to a roundtable?
Sure. I can tell you that there was a lot of curiosity about the roundtables when we re-engaged them. Some of the people that were involved in the earlier days of ICAL, back when it was ICA, had experienced the roundtables. We all got a lot of benefit from them. And coming into the new ones, there was some question about where we were heading as a movement and what would these entail. Would we be doing the same old thing that we've done? Would we be reaching into new seasons and new generations? And so I think a lot of people coming to the roundtable that were veterans, they were just kind of watching to see what we would have and how it would go. I think for the new people found the same thing that all of us that came in early found, is that it was very refreshing to sit around a group of peers, talk across the table from each other without there being a major hierarchical order, but we could talk at a peer level about things that we were dealing with and things that we were facing, and draw from one another the strength on how to navigate things from a different perspective. And in all of the roundtables that I was able to attend, it was very refreshing to see that element, which has been foundational to us from the beginning, came back into focus. Well, I think we lost a little of that during the pandemic and during the shift. We kind of went more conference-y, and conferences, a bunch of people sitting around while somebody talked. This way, everybody had something to bring to the table, and everybody had a plate to carry home from the table. And it was a lot better mix. And I think everybody was excited about that.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it, by the way, that everybody brings something and goes home with something. And I think that in the days of social media that we live in, access to YouTube and all kinds of lectures and sermons and teachings and conferences, that there is something unique, I think, now these days about that personal touch, don't you? Where we're all in the same room at a round table, literally, talking to one another and having a conversation in real life.
Yeah, I very much agree. The downside of the social media aspect of it, it is very hard to hear inflection. It is very easy to hone your communication and say exactly what you want. I know personally, I'll sit down and type something and probably retype it 3 times before I hit send. People lose the candor, or people misinterpret the candor. And when you're face to face and you're relating, you don't only have the benefit of hearing it in the vernacular that's being communicated, hearing it in the tone that is being communicated. You also get to hear it after sitting down and having coffee with the person beforehand. And there's a sense of fellowship, and you're engaged in a symmetry of the conversation that is not just the verbal communication, but it's the overall response, the heart to heart and soul to soul that goes with it. I think it's a very strong benefit to have us at the table together.
And now you're building on that. You're taking that deeper. You're taking these elements into what you've called intensives. And as the conveners of Region 4, which is Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida, you've had one of these in Atlanta. Now you're moving into Florida. And so give us just a little bit of an idea of what the intensives are. How did you come up with that idea, and how do they differ, and how are they the same with the roundtables that we've been having?
Okay. One of the things, and I guess part of this was the benefit of being able to be at many, many roundtables around the nation, is that we got to looking at what we did in our January, which was our inaugural roundtable. We had 25, 28 people came. We had some people that we lost because we had a storm, just like we had this week, and they had to leave out earlier, couldn't make it. But we went through all the basics in that meeting, and we had people that traveled to Savannah from as far as Miami, which is an 8-hour run. And so we had a lot of people, we're stretched. We have a lot of people traveling from distance to be able to get here. And we initially scheduled that we would have a second roundtable sometime in the August timeframe. But we got to looking and said, what did we accomplish in the first one? And that is, we got an overview of a process. Our topic, that was our primary topic, was generational reach. I was blessed to have some people at the table that were in their 20s, as well as having some people that are in their senior years, we'll say it like that. But it gave us a broad perspective on what's missing in some of our generational reach. But one of the things that came to the table with us is, as we were talking to people that were having I can't hardly say it, generational reach. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. The people that were in Statesboro, Georgia, at a college campus in South Georgia had one approach. A person that was operating in an urban area in downtown Orlando had a completely different approach. The people that we had that were living in South Carolina, where all the kids still have gun racks on their trucks and they're driving to school, had yet another approach. And so there are similarities on how to handle generational reach. But as they were talking about, well, this is what we need to do and this is what we've done, some of my 20-year-olds said, yeah, for us, that would never work. But then another guy said, but it worked great for us. And so we began to realize some of what we're talking about, it has the same DNA, but you grow beans in one environment, you grow tomatoes in another environment, you grow corn in another environment. And like the scripture says, you raise up the child in the way that is bent. You have to know what you're growing. So rather than creating another all skate and having a general session, we decided to break this out into the regions. We took one north to where the people that were up there could come and not have a 7-8 hour run. And we took one to Florida, which is going to happen in a week, that the people that are there in that culture and that environment, and we're taking the topic and all the main points, but we're breaking them down regionally so that everybody can resource it based on their region and what's happening, because there's a different environment in Atlanta.
Wow, that's really good. So it's the same subjects, but yet they take on a whole new look based upon the culture that is represented at that roundtable geographically. And,
Yes.
and this is so important to us also, Tim, because you're creating a model that I think is going to be important for us moving forward in USCAL. And that is that each one of these regions that is multi-state really does encompass several different subcultures, and they are regional. And it's important for us then to see how we can break it down even further, where we're not having a roundtable with 50 or 60 people, but we're having roundtables with 20 with 25, maybe with 12 in different regions, and then not just a roundtable, but also it's important for us to understand how to create fellowship that's ongoing and relationships that are ongoing before and after these roundtables as well. So I'm sure that that's happening in these places that you're referring to.
Yeah, even at the onset, I mean, we've had one and we're going to a second, but it's kind of like my daughter did an experiment as a kid where she put a potato in a glass of water where you hold it up with the toothpicks. And with ours, it started to sprout. We started to see the little sprouts coming off of it. And so we've had one intensive. We're going to the second intensive. It'll be our third meeting complete for the region. But already I'm seeing the connectivity uh, between what happened to the people that were in the intensives. For instance, we have a church in Statesboro that has a men's conference. And as they were talking about reaching this younger generation, they were talking about the men's conference. Well, I have now since found out that they have people from north of Atlanta and people from South Carolina that have signed up to come to the men's conference in Statesboro. There was already a seed, and there's already a connectivity happening with the people that were sitting around the table in Atlanta. And they're resourcing. They're coming to the meeting because they want some men's fellowship, but they also want to be able to observe this particular church and how they're using their younger generation to move forward. And so it's growing organically and it's growing very quickly. And I was very pleased to see that.
That's fantastic, because that's exactly what we feel like our main vision and mission is. Our purpose for existence in USCAL is to build that safety net. And that is a result of tight-knit relationships where we grow stronger and stronger in fellowship and trust. And thank you for helping make that happen in your region. And there's other regional conveners that are going to follow that same path. So it's pretty exciting to watch it grow. You've mentioned a couple times now generations, younger
Mhm.
generations. Thank you for not saying old. You use the term not so young generations.
Uh, Starting to get a
That's
little
right.
gray here.
That's right. So, which brings me to an interesting kind of personal biography in your life that parallels mine. We were raised as pastors' kids. Okay, so both of us received inheritance from our fathers and our fathers' fathers, or at least I think in your case, maybe your mother's father was a
You know,
minister.
it's my
My
father's from, yeah.
grandparents on both sides were ministers, and they
Right.
actually sang together. And so my father was a minister. So here we are at our age, having lived most of our life, maybe all of our life in ministry, and we didn't run from it. So this is a big question, really, and that is, tell me why you didn't run from ministry. While so many preachers' kids run from ministry, run from the church, and run from God, like I did, you found a place of acceptance. You found a path you wanted to follow, and you've done that all of your life.
Mhm.
Speak to maybe a minister out there whose kids aren't following that path right now. Can you tell us what
Well,
happened that maybe helped you along that way?
yeah, I really think that what it boiled down to is that, um, and let me back up first. Let me say that I also had a lot of friends who were preachers' kids, PKs, and all of us were voted most likely to go to jail. It's kind of a rough thing because we were
Yeah.
jammed up. The joke used to be the preachers' kids are so bad because they hang out with the deacons' kids, and we were all stuck. But one advantage that I had that I can say that many of my peers in that arena did not have is that our parents made us part of the ministry. And when I say that, I don't mean we were just there pushing the brooms and raising the tents and doing all the work that nobody else would do. They considered us to be a viable part of what we were doing in ministry. So, as a ministry family, when they were ministering to a family, very often they would have us involved in that ministry. There might be a husband and a wife that's going through a marital dispute. My mom and dad would say several things without breaking confidence. They'll say, "You know what, Jimmy's mom and dad, we're helping them right now, but what we need you to do is we need you to help Jimmy.
Hmm.
And this is what we need you to do
Okay.
to help Jimmy." And so we didn't know that Jimmy's mom and dad were about to kill each other and fall off the deep end of a cliff. But what we knew is that Jimmy had a lot of tension in his house and Jimmy needed some love. And that was just one example, being involved in the worship team, being involved in the different things that were there. They made it so that the ministry from very early on was not our mom and dad's ministry. They were just pastoring a church. They had a ministry. We understood this was a calling, but they said, as long as you're part of our family, this house is part of that calling. My dad would say over and over what Joshua said, choose you this day whom you serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And he didn't lord it over us and say, you're going to do what I need you to do. He's like, we have the honor of doing this for God. And he ingrained that into us early. And so that was the positive that kept us moving into ministry. The other thing he did is he tried to talk me out of it. When we started moving forward, he's like, he was like, are you sure this is what you want to do? This is the cost it's going to be. You know what? With your skill set, son, you can make 3 times the money out there that you can in here. Think about what we've gone through. Think about the guys that have hurt our family and the people that we've had to wade through. And his words were, if there's any way I can talk you out of it, you have no business being in it. And it was pretty strategic because that was during the ages where you buck your father as a kid. The reverse psychology, I guess, took itself a little bit. But the biggest thing is he couldn't talk me out of what I knew in my heart that I wanted to do to make a difference in people. And so that was the positive side of what we had with that transition. That's why we stayed.
And
Another
it,
thing that's very important to add to that mix is, now he did something that he and I have we disagreed with then, and in the years since he came back and said, I wish I had done it differently, is that he refused to ordain me until I was 30. He came up in the discipleship movement and everything was very, very regimented. And he's like, Jesus started his public ministry at 30. I'm not going to ordain you till then. So I had about 7 or 8 or 9 years where I could have had a lot of, strong youth, crazy productivity that I felt was curtailed because he wouldn't move forward. But when he did ordain me, at my ordination service, he made this very powerful statement. He says, I did not raise you up to stand underneath me. He said, I gave you everything I've got. And as I anoint you today, you're standing on my shoulders so that you can go farther and faster. He says, and I'm expecting you to run and run harder. And I'm expecting you not to let me catch you because I haven't stopped running. And that was kind of the premise for us moving forward. And that was probably one of my saving graces, is that he never tried to raise me up with the be under you and someday all this will be yours. He's like, get out there and go. I'm not letting go of this. I still have work to do. Go do something. And years later, I ended up taking over the church that he pastored, but he had handed off 3. And I was just one of the ministers in a line of succession that he handed off. And so that's kind of where it went for me.
wow, and your life parallels with mine too, because we were a family ministry.
Hmm.
And I think I want to say this in the form of a statement, but then it's also a question. I want you to comment on it. One of the things I look back that I think was really important that my mom and dad did is they let us be pretty normal kids. There was never the pedestal that we were put on. I never felt that way. And I never felt odd that my dad was a pastor. I went to school with kids whose dads were police officers and construction workers and sold insurance. And my dad just happened to lead a church. It never occurred to me to be anything different than just normal. All 5 of us kids were raised pretty much that way. We played sports. We did the things that other kids did. So there was not this, even though we went to a holiness church, my mom and dad probably caught some heat. That's the other thing. Not only did
Right.
they raise us normal, they didn't always let us see the heat they were catching. Probably, because it would have maybe soured us towards the church and people in general in the church. So mom and dad had some things behind private doors, behind closed doors that were private in terms of conversations and things like that. But we were pretty normal. And I think mom and dad spared us a lot of that heartache of seeing it firsthand, which could
Hmm.
be bad. I mean, all of that could go either way. But what about you? Do you feel like it was kind of a normal upbringing and never thought much about that?
Well, as far as the term normal, because it's all we knew, that was our normal. I will say that we had the opposite end. We got to see well, I won't use the word that comes to mind, but we got to see it. I found
We want
myself
to keep
very,
this PG, okay? So
exactly.
thank
I,
you.
I found myself very, very dissuaded by some of God's children. I thought God's great, but some of his kids were just really not.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I saw some people do some real damage to my family, and it really embittered me in some ways. Uh, one of the things that happened, and again, coming back because my mom and dad were very gracious about really encouraging us early on to not make mistakes that they saw later they would change. And that was uh, pioneering churches and being in a situation where we're pastoring and being a local pastor. My mother, particularly, there was always a fear that something would go wrong and the people in the church would turn against us or we would have to leave. We were in a denominational society. And in that setting, you screw up, you get fired. And so we lived under the threat of don't do that because your father could lose his job if you act stupid. No pressure, but and that hurt us as well. But at the same time, the way they kept that balance is because they had so ingrained in us that the ministry was also ours. They shared with us the value of why we come up higher. My dad would sometimes use the phrase, "We're not just mere men." And it's not saying we're better than everybody else. He was talking about the double honor and the higher calling that goes with that. And he said, if you want what God has for you, you have to be willing to steward your life to maintain it. And he would say things all the time like, you have to be careful. You're highly anointed, but if your character does not stay consistent with your anointing will outrun your character and you will fall. And we're talking to a man who, when I was 18 years old, fired me and took me off the platform and went 2 Sundays with no music because my character would not align with my anointing. And he says, I'm not going to be the guy that sets you up for destruction. And, the rest of the story is he came back and worked to fix it, but he proved his point. I'm not going to let you hurt yourself. So there was a lot of pluses and minuses that went with that. The thing that saved me through that process was the ingraining of this ministry that is in you. It's not just a generational thing. You're not doing it because your dad or your grandfather, 7 generations in my case. You have to make the decision, and this has to be between you and God, and we'll celebrate you regardless of your decision. So I hope that answers that.
Yes, absolutely does. And it really brings us to another question, which is succession.
Mhm.
There are people right now, many people, in fact, who are reaching the point where it's time to hand off these ministries and churches they started. The independent church movement that was so strong, 70s, 80s, 90s, now those churches are being led by people that it's time to transition. So you're in a great position having been on both ends of that spectrum. You were the successor. As you mentioned, your father handed something off to you and said, here you go. And now you're running with that. But also, you've got to be thinking about succession yourself. Your children have stepped into places of ministry. You're seeing a few years down the road, maybe it's time for me to hand off. So help us with that. There's a lot of leaders maybe struggling with what succession looks like. And when I hear about these types of situations like Kyle Searcy, Bart Pierce, Dana Gamble, whose son is right there with him, it's like I'm
Mhm.
telling these people to take notes because we
Right.
need a good model with do's and don'ts with succession. Well, you can go back and you can help us from the end of one who's a successor. So, what was that like? What tips would you give someone who maybe is approaching the decisions that I described?
Okay. Uh, well, I can say this, and let me start by saying, number one, that I have a very, very strong relationship with my father. He's one of my best friends. We talk almost every day. And after he stepped away from us and moved into the hills of North Georgia in his mid 70s, he started yet one more church plant, and he just handed that off in the last year after 5 years. And at 80, he hands it off. One of the things that really hurts a lot of churches, a lot of ministries, is that for a minister, our identity is so wrapped up in what we build and we develop. We are the patriarch. We are the father of our movement. We're the father of the church that we built. We're the father of the community that we pastor, or matriarch. I don't want to make this just about fathers, but our identity is wrapped up so often in our impact that when it's time to hand it off, you hand it off. And like, what am I going to do now? I've still got something in me. I don't want to just go play golf. I don't want to just go sit on a boat. And so our identity gets wrapped up in that. I know what I'm good at. I know what I do. I know how God is using me, and I like the change. And I'm not even trying to pat myself on the back, but I wake up every day with a purpose. And now that purpose is being handed off to somebody else. And in the words of my mom, I feel like I'm kicked to the curb. Uh, you have to be able to look. I'm finding this out more and more with myself, and Dana helped me a lot with this. You have to look generationally and say, okay, what is the personal vision that you have? What is it that God has for you next? I've got a couple dear friends who inherited their father's ministry and took their first pastorate at age 60 and above.
Hmm.
They served as a deacon from age 20 to age 60, or an elder, but they're in their first pastorate in their 60s. They've already lost a lot of traction because they were just waiting. And they all inherited 70-member, 80-member churches. You know, what could they have done 40 years earlier if they had been given the opportunity to take it then, or had been given the opportunity to go out and do something else? They're basically caretakers and trying to figure out just how to navigate those 70 or 80 people who still don't want them because they still miss the old guy that they were with for the last 40 years. And I said old guy that time. But you have to recognize that your identity is a major factor in this. I'm now looking at what God has done. God has graced us to take our church and move it through a major transition. We went from a small facility. God blessed us with a multi-million-dollar facility that's going to be paid for in another year and a half, hopefully. It was supernatural. We didn't do it. He's done it. All these wonderful things. Yes, I'm finally coming in my own. Everything that's people are prophesying over me, saying the prophecies of your youth are coming to pass. I'm like, yes, this is the time, and now I'm doing it. And I'm looking around, and I got these 25 and 27. My son turns 27 tomorrow. I'm like, right as I hit my peak, these guys are all sitting in the gates like racehorses with their feet tromping, and I'm like, am I going to keep them in the gate, or do I engage them? And if I engage them, what does that look like for me? What it looked like for me is I'm an apostle. I need to be more worried about the 12 and let them worry about the multitudes. It's their time. And I need to be willing to say, okay, I'll put an overall vision into this. This is the DNA. This is where we're going. This is where I feel like we need to be led. How would you get there? And I've got to be able to train them on how to get there. But the other part, Mark, is I have to have, and I've fought this battle very diligently. It is the battle between preference and principle. There are a lot of things as pastors that we do that we label as principle. Let me give you an example. The building. This is the house of God. It needs to look regal. It needs to look like this. It needs to be like this. We need to operate in excellence. The problem is that if I go through scripture, a lot of the things that I'm doing that I've labeled principle are really about preference. Why? Because if I were working at TBN, excellence would be gilded furniture and gold lions. And if I am hanging around with John Michael Talbot, excellence is linen cloth and a Franciscan habit. And both are given with excellence, but they're on two sides of the spectrum. And yet both elements would have areas where they would say this is principled understanding, when really it's preferential understanding. So, for instance, as we put our new multi-million-dollar facility together, I, who have a background in design, stepped away completely, and the only room that I designed is my office. I handed all of the design elements to my 25-year-old daughter, who led the charge and made it look completely different than I ever thought it should look. But her generation loves it, and our generation loves how we're reaching people.
Right.
And I had to not let myself get offended when she said, Dad, all that artwork that you bought. Yeah, she said, you need to go find a way to hang it, or you need to put it on eBay and get rid of it. I'm like, but it's beautiful. Yes, it is. But no.
Put it in your office, Dad, or take it back to Hobby Lobby, whichever.
Yeah, and now my office is a little fuller than it should be. One thing that happened, Mark, is just I have this wonderful covenant, almost like a godson, who's autistic, and he just became verbal about a year and a half ago. And he walked through the building, and as he's walking through the building, I said to him, Jeremiah, I said, do you like the new building? I like the new building. And we walked into my office, and he said this. I will never forget. He goes, why does this room look like the old building?
There you go. So you gotta find your place of comfort. with all of
Exactly.
your same paintings and all the designs. That's
That
fun. Well, but that's probably a testimony of success too, doing exactly what you wanted to do, what you intended to do.
right, and that's my happy place, and everybody leaves me alone there. But my point is that systematically, I'm handing off the elements of ministry. I'm holding the reins in the direction, but I have let go of my preference on how we get there. As long
Mhm.
as it's godly, as long as it's functioning, as long as it's not running over other teams, I don't care if it's loud or it's soft. I don't care if it's pastels or bold tones. I don't care if it's country or rock. I'm looking at the end result. And the end result is not just the fruit that's being born. And we have people every week that are coming to Christ. We're literally having new salvations almost every Sunday in our building, people walking through the doors. I'm looking and I'm seeing these 20, 25, 28, 30-year-old kids, not just our kids, but other kids, taking ownership for producing the ministry that's coming forth, that's reaching these people. And my life gets easier. I get to focus on what I want to focus on, which is imparting into them what what will allow them to succeed.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have for today, and I think we just scratched the surface of this subject for sure. But
We
I
need an intensive on it.
Yes, exactly. Well, I was going to say this is probably part of what you'll be talking about in your intensives because of next generation and their involvement and giving us some advice and but ongoing relationship too, because you very seldom, if ever, take one setting and just take it carte blanche into the next setting perfectly without changes. And then there's this ongoing need of communication back and forth. So I appreciate you availing yourself to these conversations, to lead as a convener in the region, to make relationships with people, and to make yourself available for anyone that might ask. So we're putting your information on the screen now. That'll give people an opportunity if they have a question that they can get a hold of you. And we appreciate everything that you and Cindy have been to Nikki and me as far as just friends and what we do together in USCAL. So just in conclusion, I'm going to let you have the last word if there's anything you want to say to the folks that are watching.
Well, for starters, Mark, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share and to be a part. Cindy and I just absolutely love our US Cal family. We spend time praying over all of you, the ones that we've met and the ones that we haven't, but we know that you're in the loop. The biggest thing is that as we continue forward with US Cal, we're not being rebranded or re-identified. Just simply, God is the identification is coming forth is that He is bringing us into the next paradigm of what He has. And so we're talking about succession, but you're in a personal succession, whoever you are. God is moving you from glory unto glory unto glory. And it's not that He changes your DNA, but the fact of the matter is that a diamond used to be identified as coal. And so allow God the license to shift your identity as He purifies you into the purest form that He has for you. And hold on to that. And just wait and see, because He's not only doing that with us individually in our churches, He's doing that with this movement as a whole. And I think this movement is going to take on a whole new identity as we grow. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you.
Yes, so am I. And you're welcome. And thank you. And thank you, everyone who is watching. And we appreciate the fact that you had spent time with us and hope that you'll connect deeper with us. That's really our hope and our goal. So until next time, God bless you and have a great day.